Hello and welcome to Media Lit, where we treat each piece of media like great literature. Joining me tonight, as always, is my wonderful co-host, Kris Ingersoll. Kris is sporting a flashy new haircut. It's looking great. Are you feeling as great as you look tonight?
I am now, man. I'm so good. You know just what to say. Thank you. You made me feel like $1,000,000. And it's been a good week. You know, this is our second podcast of the week. I love a 2-podcast week. Tonight, we're getting back to sort of a classic Media Lit format for the first time in a long time. So just thrilled to be here doing this with you. Oh, and I got to share real quick. Shout out to Seth at the Storyland podcast. It's a kids bedtime story podcast that my daughter loves because he was kind enough, after he and I struck up a bit of a conversation socially, he was kind enough to include my daughter in the most recent story that's posting this week. And we got to listen to it this past weekend. And man, watching her take in this story and realize what was happening as a surprise, it was like watching her open her gifts on like Christmas morning. As a dad, it was a pretty proud and thrilling moment. So I've had a great week. How are you? How was Six Flags yesterday? Second time this summer, right?
Yeah, I've got a thrill-seeking 10-year-old at home. And yeah, we just finished up our second big trip to Six Flags. We rode lots of Batman-themed rides, which we'll find is very appropriate. Although we did not tackle the crazy Harley Quinn spin cycle or whatever the heck it's called. That was a little too much for him. But yeah, we rocked Superman, Batman, Joker, Riddler. What a day. It was quite a time. Really glad we got to share that. But
that.
Kris, I love that you're here talking to me about the power of story, the way it can move someone. Our listeners know that's what Media Lit is all about. But we have a guest tonight who understands that better than possibly anyone we've ever had on the podcast before. Our special guest tonight is Timm Freitas of the Garden of English YouTube channel. He is also published all sorts of books and materials for himself, for the College Board, for their AP and Lit exams. And he is also someone I briefly taught with early in my career. And even though we haven't been in touch very much in the last 14 years, I never forgot that on his classroom door, he had a sign for the Garden of English. And when I discovered quite a few years later that he had turned that into a product and a service for students and for teachers, I was really moved. Because as a teacher, when I feel like I'm working toward my vision, my life feels really complete. I feel really excited to go to work in the morning. When things get in the way of that, it can be less enjoyable. So I love the way that Timm has really embraced that. Before I have him say hello, because he's been gone for 14 years, I've just had to wonder what he's been up to in the Garden of English. And the only thing I can imagine is this. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought.
As in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through that vorpal blade went snicker snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, calloo calais. He chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves and momraths out grabe. Yeah, I've been slaying a lot. I've been slaying a lot of heads in the education world for the last 14 years. And I know that it says, so rested he by the tum-tum tree, but there's no rest for the wicked, Randy. I'm fortunate to be here. I've been, working on building the Garden of English as not only my classroom, where I do teach AP Lit and AP Lang, and I am more involved in the AP Lang side of things than the AP Lit side of things, although I do both. But I've been building the Garden of English into a YouTube channel to really help give kids a lot of free stuff to help them with their exams, and teachers, I try to give them a lot of free stuff to help them in their classroom. And yeah, we've just been trying to build that vision. And I appreciate that you mentioned that sign on the Garden of English, because this on my classroom door for the Garden of English, because that sign was from a student, and it's actually still up on my wall. And I really appreciated, because that was her idea. Her name was Allie, and it was her idea to just come in with this sign. And she's like, I just did this for you. And that was the first student to ever do something like that for me. And now, if you ever check out anything, the Garden of English, and you look at any of the artwork that's produced that we make, it's actually my former students who have made all of the artwork on everything that's the Garden of English. And my full-time artist is a former student of mine that I hired when she was a freshman in high school. Now she's a great family friend. But it's all student-generated art in my for the Garden of English, and I'm thrilled that I can actually support students in that way. And when they give me their art, they don't give it to me; I pay for it, because they need to realize that good art is meant to be paid for. And so we try to support students and stuff, not only as a teacher, but also if they're going to support the Garden of English, we're going to pay them for it. Just real quick, another way that we support students too is whenever I make products, I let my students write all of the essays. And I pay my students for their essays, and they're like, no, you could just have it. And I'm always like, no, you don't have to do things for free, because if you have a lot of strong intellect, let's know that we can be, reimbursed for what we do. But we're not here to talk about English class and things like that. I'm sorry about that part. We're here to talk about Batman. So, let's do that.
No, dude, I am so stoked that we were able to talk about the Garden of English, because when Randy first introduced me to you as a guest, and I knew you'd be joining us, and I knew we'd be talking about Batman, I wanted to know who you were. And your name is written Timm with 2 M's. I was like,
yeah,
Bruce Timm?
Timm, right?
Can't be. So,
Yeah.
but who you are ultimately impressed me, and so much more. I admire educators like you and Randy tremendously. And so to do a little bit of a dive into your background and to understand the Garden of English and the mission there. I'm just so thrilled to have you on the pod and to be able to highlight that for anybody who might be listening out there. It's just great work.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
So yeah, I guess without further ado, I'm really stoked that tonight you have brought to us a homework assignment from one of my all-time favorite series, Batman, the animated series. To this day, it's my ringtone, scares the ever-living you-know-what out of folks when it goes off in public. But it's been a Batman summer. Randy and I had the pleasure of joining the Batman by the Numbers podcast from the Pop Break for their definitive Batman draft earlier this summer. I had the pleasure of rejoining them for a Joker's ranking very recently. I mean, heck, Randy and I got our start on this podcast doing Batman Returns.
There you
so
go.
Batman is very much a part of our identity as a podcast, and I'm stoked to be able to talk about it tonight. Specifically, we'll be talking about one of my favorite episodes from that series, The Heart of Ice, famous introduction of Mr. Freeze into the canon. So thank you for assigning that to us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. When Randy said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" All I could think of was, I always tell people in my AP Lit class, I am convinced I could teach an equally effective AP Lit class with Batman the Animated Series or The Twilight Zone than I can using all great literature from the past. If I could only just show Batman the Animated Series, I guarantee that I could teach just as an effective class.
Sign of a great educator, for sure, but also sign of great storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, man. One of my favorite lessons that I use in the school year leans heavily into Black Panther, the Marvel film. So yeah, love that philosophy, love that attitude. Before I move on to the next segment, I just need to thank you quickly, Timm, for giving us that Jabberwocky recitation. I was sweating it out before the podcast with Kris. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Timm loves Jabberwocky. I hope I'm remembering this properly.
Well,
And,
I know that we're just on a recording, but I'm going to lift up my right arm sleeve here, and I've got all Alice right here, right? So this whole half sleeve on my arm is Alice in Wonderland. So, yep, you were right. You were right.
Our listening audience at home can't really appreciate what it is that I got to witness, because I knew Randy was going to drop this line. I knew Randy was hoping it was going to land with you, this callback to this poem that you both shared. But to watch the realization dawn on you what he was doing, I was like, oh, great, it's working.
I can't even believe you remembered that.
Dude, I can't believe you remembered every word of the poem from where he left off to where you finished.
You should hear me with the Cat in the Hat.
Unbelievable. To the listeners at home, the podlings, I was just floored. You should have seen my jaw drop, because I knew Randy read his, and then Timm just went off from the dome. It's very impressive.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Hey, and we're not even that far off topic, right? Because Batman features the Mad Hatter, so
Yep, that's right.
It's all
we're only a
relevant.
hop, skip, and a jump away.
And that's what he's one of the most underutilized villains, I think, in the Batman canon, right? Because oh my gosh, I thought that they did an okay job in Gotham, but he's just so not touched so often, and it's like, no, get him in. You can really do a lot with him. And actually, that reminds me of the episode of Perchance to Dream when Batman figures out that he's dreaming because he can't read the books. And now I can't tell you how many times I've actually been in a dream and I'm like, can I read the books? And I always try to read the books or not. And I never can.
It all comes back to Batman, man. It all comes back to Batman.
It's a beautiful thing. But yeah, Kris was just outlining our Batman summer, the fact that we started Media Lit with Batman. So our listeners know quite a bit about our relationships with Batman in general. But we'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with Batman, Timm. Did this start with the animated series? Does it go back further? What's your history with this character and this mythos?
So it started with the Tim Burton Batman, the first Tim Burton Batman, where I just started getting like action figures. I was born in 1986, and I was really young when they were really marketing towards kids. And one of the things that was really interesting is that I started collecting like Batman action figures to the point where, like, when I was in 8th grade, my best friend would buy me a Batman action figure to put in my collection. And it was weird because I didn't necessarily play with them or anything like that, but I had a bunch of Batman action figures that, I've got 5 kids. My kids still play with that. I think the oldest Batman that I have is actually a toothbrush holder from like 1981. But so, he was my action figure hero, and I probably saw clips of the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton Batman when I was 4 or 5, but I didn't actually see it until I was probably about 8 or 9. My parents probably would never have allowed for that, but I had this Batman, action figure set. But the other part of Batman where it comes in, like in my mind, I know that there's this comic book lore and people are like the comics, but I really got into Batman, like how much I love Batman, with the animated series, to the point where when I was growing up, I was obsessed with baseball. And my best friend and I would play baseball in my front yard every day, school, summer, whenever. However, every day at 4 p.m., the baseball was put down. We would go inside. We would watch Batman the animated series, and then we'd go back outside for not 6 more hours, but like 3 more hours. And every day during the week, of course, not on the weekends, because it wasn't on the weekends, we would watch Batman the animated series. We never cared about the Superman side of it. It was just Batman the animated series, and those were some of the best days of my life. So I've got all of this kind of Batman imagery in my mind from when I was a real little kid. I have all that built into my, my Batman collection. And then I just have all of these fond memories of playing baseball all day in the summer, but at 4 o'clock, always going in for Batman the animated series. And when I rewatched it when I was in my early 20s and my mid 20s, and then I actually had my first child, I was like, wow, this is just as compelling as it was when I was 9 years old through 12 years old. And that's really where where it comes in for my history with Batman. So I will admit I'm not like the purest comic Batman, but I can't picture a better Joker than Mark Hamill. And when I think of Batman, I think of Kevin Conroy. I don't think of Michael Keaton, even though he was my first kind of real picture of it. Oh, and you know what? I forgot. Before I saw the Keaton ones, I used to also love the Adam West ones, because that was enough for my parents to let me watch that one for sure. But yeah, so that's kind of my whole background with Batman in 5 minutes or less.
I love that, brother. And I think, honestly, it's probably a fairly common story for folks of our generation, right? Like, I was born in 88, very similar time frame. And I remember those Kenner action figures.
Yeah.
And I remember all the iconography around Batmania after 89 dropped, right? And there's just so much merch out there.
Yeah.
I also was introduced to things like the X-Men or Batman through the cartoons first. We had great animated series as kids. So I think this is probably a common story for a lot of us, that it wasn't necessarily the written comic, but rather the animated series.
Right.
So, I mean, with all those peripheral memories, is there any like one specific standout memory you have of Batman in your past?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a weird one though, because I remember walking out of Batman and Robin when it came out,
Yeah.
and I loved it. And my parents were walking out and they were like, that was trash. And now I watch it and I'm like, on what planet is George Clooney Batman ever? Right. And I think it's just so lame. But I just remember being a little kid and well, I don't even remember how old I was at the time, maybe 11, 10 or 11. But I wanted to like it so much. So I made myself like it so much. But, it's good to talk about Batman and Robin now because that's the worst version of Mr. Freeze. And we're going to talk about the best version in a couple of minutes. But
Yeah, it was bound to come up tonight.
yeah, for sure. It's just, that's my iconic memory of Batman when I was younger in terms of like that one moment when I thought it was awesome because it was just Batman. But now I'm like, no, I was being a romantic at the time, not a realist. And I'm going to bring that up a little later too.
I think that's totally fair. And I think,
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned that movie because those movies really brought the Kenner toys to life, right? With
Yeah.
all the different suits and
Mhm.
different gadgets to apply to the various scenarios
Yes.
that he was facing. But I think it's a really poignant talk on that movie to say that the kid loved it and the parents didn't, because Batman at his best should be for both. Batman
Yeah.
should work for both, like you said earlier about the animated series.
And what's interesting is I wish I brought this, even though I know that we have listeners and not viewers, but I actually still have my Mr. Freeze action figure from
Hmm.
the Batman and Robin. So all of these action figures are actually still at my house. My 8-year-old daughters play with them. And I have the Freeze and I always look at it and I'm like, what year was that again? Oh yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
At the very least, it was a great time for neon.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So
And Batman Forever too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I want to ask you another one of our sort of staple background questions.
Yeah.
And usually I ask this kind of passively, but I'm particularly excited to ask you because we've been talking about the artwork that your students have produced over the years. We've been talking about the great Garden of English merch and things like that. So I was wondering if your love for Batman has influenced your style in any way. If not your style, like your larger interest, your values as a person.
So the thing about my love for Batman, first of all, I told you that kids make me signs for my classroom, the Garden of English. I actually have a sign over on my wall where someone drew the Batman animated series logo, but they put the Garden of English in Batman the animated series type font. But it's all hand done. It's all hand drawn, right?
Mhm.
So all of my students know this. I've got another sign from another student, and of course, like there's a Batman on it, there's a Mad Hatter on it, there's all of these things. So it's certainly influenced it. But the other thing too about Batman, and I'm probably going to refer back to this a little later, is I'm a pretty happy guy, and I'm a pretty light spirited guy. But one of the things I love about Batman is how dark he is, which is weird because I don't think that anybody would ever kind of be like, Tim, he can be kind of a dark guy. You know what I mean? And the truth is that if you look at my imagery for the Garden of English, like I even have my Garden of English lamp behind me. I know that listeners can't see it, but I've got my skull in my garden here. And if you look at my Garden of English imagery at any point, there's always going to be a skull, there's always going to be a snake, and there's always going to be flowers surrounding it. And it's that little bit of the edge. And I think that's what Batman satisfies in my character.
Mm-hmm.
It's that edge, he's not Superman. He's not, this upstanding character. There's some brood there. And the truth is I have a little brood underneath, and Batman satisfies that for me. And no other superhero can do that for me. The X-Men don't do that for me. And I used to love the X-Men cartoon. It's really Batman that can get me there. And I love it.
Brother, you're speaking my language.
Yeah, some of that sounds almost word for word from our Batman Returns pod, our very first episode.
There we go.
I totally relate. I think different from you though, as far as like my entry point, because like similarly for me, I'm not Batman on the surface. There's something underneath.
Yeah.
But I met a friend when I was in college who introduced me to some of the Batman comics, which took what was already a sense that I had a kinship with that character
Mm.
and helped to deepen my understanding of his psychology.
Yeah.
And it helped me really understand what it was about Batman that worked for me. Chang will forever be that guy that I associate with Batman. What about you? Do you have anybody like that, like a friend or family member who you associate super closely with Batman?
I do. So I have a friend who runs he actually runs a podcast for the geek generation. His name is Rob Valoy, and he runs he runs an entire like media set, and he does a lot of stuff on Twitch too. But first of all, his voice, he could be the voice of Batman any day of the week, right? But he actually loves Batman so much that his cat's name is Gotham.
Yes.
He
Nice.
just got another cat and named it one of the newer sister cities from one of the series.
Bloodhaven, perhaps?
That's it. Yeah. So sorry.
Ooh.
Yes. So he named his other cat Haven. And then
Nice.
what's awesome about him is like his obsession with Batman goes across the entire like every Batman universe ever. And he has a cosplay suit that's awesome anyway. So he's got this perfect Batman voice. It's like you could never imagine. He could easily be a Bruce Wayne or Batman, and he should be cast. And his cosplay suit, he actually designed himself, and he took parts from Batman Beyond, and he took parts from other Batman suits that he liked, and then he got the whole thing made. And like when I think of Batman, I'm like, whenever a new Batman movie comes out, I'm trying to go see it with him. And then I always am like, Rob, am I allowed to like this version of the Batman or not? You know, and I'll actually take his recommendation.
Very, very cool. Yeah, we all need a Batman influencer in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks. As Kris mentioned earlier, we aren't trying to cover the entire animated series tonight. We are here to dig into one of the most famous episodes, Heart of Ice. Now, if you're a listener and you've never seen the episode, or maybe it's been a minute and you don't have time to go pull up the episode right now, I just want to hit you with a little synopsis of what happens in this episode. As always, at the end, Kris and our guests are going to jump in. If you think there's something that maybe I could have emphasized more, or maybe if there's anything I accidentally misrepresented a little bit or that you saw differently, I would absolutely love to hear any of those takes as well. But here we go, Heart of Ice. We open on snowflakes, ethereal music, and a spinning figurine within a glass music box before the grainy, shadowy visage of Dr. Freeze looms in the background. Two red eyes pop into the frame as he swears vengeance on behalf of his lost love. It's the hottest August on record, yet Gotham City is dealing with a strange string of robberies carried out using some sort of powerful freeze ray. Each crime seems to target GothCorp and its glaringly insincere CEO, Ferris Boyle. Despite Boyle's efforts to promote and capitalize on his public humanitarianism, Batman knows this business mogul is suspicious as hell. He begins his investigation. Over the course of a few confrontations, Mr. Freeze deploys his freeze ray with reckless abandon. While his anger is justified, his singular focus on revenge is selfish and dangerous. He is blind to any and all collateral damage. Batman efficiently uncovers Mr. Freeze's plan to build a massive ice cannon, as well as the GothCorp cover-up of the event that killed Nora Freeze. We learn that GothCorp quite literally pulled the plug on Victor's cryogenic research and doomed his wife, who was awaiting the proper treatment for her terminal illness. GothCorp believes Victor was also killed in an ensuing lab accident. Despite the fact that he is struggling from a nasty cold thanks to all these icy encounters, Batman is on the scene when Mr. Freeze shows up to a humanitarian award ceremony to carry out his revenge on Ferris Boyle and every innocent bystander at the ceremony. In the final scuffle, Batman deploys his greatest weapon since shark repellent when he smashes Mr. Freeze's cryo suit helmet with the thermos of chicken soup that Alfred insisted he take on the mission. We end on a shot of Mr. Freeze in a specialized Sub-Zero cell at Arkham Asylum. He stares wistfully at the music box and begs Nora to forgive him for his failed attempt at vengeance. Timm, you are our very special guest, so I'm going to let you jump in case there's anything you want to add or offer a different perspective on.
Absolutely not. I mean, honestly, I feel like you kind of channeled your inner contemporary Shakespeare there, Randy, to produce that. But no, that was thorough. Wow.
Yeah, I'm always in awe of his recaps, and I was just going to say that it's now been a few weeks since I had the pleasure of sitting and really taking one in like this. Randy, as always, well represented.
Yeah, we've been doing so many special drafts. We haven't been doing my fishing for compliments segment of the pod, so I'm so happy that we're back here. I really need that.
Hook, line, and sinker, buddy. You got me.
Yeah.
We are going to look at this episode like a piece of great literature, but I want to ask a few more personal connection questions to Timm and also my co-host Kris, because I am someone who only watched Batman the Animated Series here and there as a kid. I was the exact right age. I watched a lot more of the X-Men. I can really only attribute this to the fact that I was probably playing way too much Super Nintendo. I think that's really what got in the way. So I actually went and watched Heart of Ice possibly for the first time in preparation for this podcast.
Wow.
And I really enjoyed it. I know it probably did not hit me as hard as it hit the two of you, but I think it's just because this episode is so iconic. It's inspired all sorts of animation and storytelling since that moment. But I really did truly love the episode. And you'll hear more from me on that. But first, I want to get into why this episode sticks in your memories. So, Timm, I'm going to go to you first. Why is this particular episode so important to you?
Well, I'm actually going to jump to a different episode to answer the question you just asked me.
Love that.
But there are two episodes that are remarkably important to me in this entire series. And the first one is On Leather Wings, which is the first episode of Batman the Animated Series. But the reason why I love it so much is because it's the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So if you have read that, you will know exactly what's going on as you watch that one. And this particular episode is so important to me because there are a couple things that happen here. First of all, Mr. Freeze is the empathetic villain. And he's the villain that you want to empathize with, not even just sympathize with, legitimately empathize with.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so compelling for me because I love the Joker and I love his chaos because once again, it kind of meets me in that kind of darker, that inner self here. But with Mr. Freeze, he's one of the first times as a kid I realized like, wow, maybe this evil guy who is evil is actually evil for the right reason. Right. And like I had to ask that question. And I remember being a little kid kind of wrestling with that. But in my literature class, I teach Frankenstein. And I love pairing Frankenstein with Heart of Ice. And I tell my kids, like, hey, listen, if I'm out and I need a sub, you're going to watch Heart of Ice and you're going to do an assignment with Heart of Ice to deal with Frankenstein. And I really think that Frankenstein is one of the most iconic works that created the empathetic villain. Yes, the villain is still responsible, but for the actions that were created, but the actual character development of the villain stems from hard circumstances in life. And to wrestle with that as a kid, when the bad guys were just normally the bad guys and the good guys were just normally the good guys, and to actually see that complexity, it blew my mind. And like when I think about complexity, what I do here is I refer to my friend Dr. Brandon Abden, who talks about complexity always being when the idealist is competing with the romantic. And I see that entirely, A, throughout this whole episode, but B, especially in this villain of Victor Freeze, because he wants the ideal vengeance, but he notices that the only real way to get it is to be evil. And so then he turns that desire for evil into an ideal view of how can I now ideally achieve real vengeance? And that's where this just snowballs, no pun intended, to create the complexity that this silly kids cartoon develops. And I'm like, man, this is The idea that this cannot be canonical literature is absurd because of how well developed this can be done in 22 minutes. The other thing that's compelling for me in relation to this, though, is when you look at this, what this particular episode is exploring, right? We have this idea of him exploring this idea of one step towards immortality, and yet he's also trying to save his wife. And all the way back to the ancient times, the oldest manuscript that we have of anything is Gilgamesh. And what is Gilgamesh? What did the people of Uruk want? They wanted a savior. What did Gilgamesh want? He wanted immortality. So this particular episode is hitting at the longest lasting human desires, and it's right here in 22 minutes with Mr. Freeze. Love it. I can't even say enough.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I can't believe you brought up On Leather Wings, because I also think about it's that, and also the Catwoman arc that leads up to this episode, right? You get that before this, and so already this show was developing a nuanced idea of it's good guys and bad guys, right? And in Kirk Langstrom, you do get somebody who outright, like, he never goes to prison. Like, Batman delivers him into the arms of his wife at the end as somebody who was completely out of control. He didn't do this. The Beast did this. But this is that extra step more complex by comparison, right? This is the very next episode after On Leather Wings. And this villain is intentionally doing something wrong, right? He is going to go ahead and put innocent people in harm's way to get his revenge. And yet we're still asked to find empathy for him. It's like that much more challenging, that much more complex, because we're being told, no, this person is consciously doing something wrong, but can you still empathize with that?
In a kid's show, nonetheless. In a kid's show.
So for me as a kid, I remember this being a part of an ongoing kind of challenge to the way I thought about good and bad. And I think it's perhaps why, as a complex Christ follower in my adult life, I think I've always found Batman really compelling, because he has really deeply seated ideas about, like, his moral compass, right? About right and wrong. But that doesn't necessarily lead to judgment in the world. It doesn't necessarily lead to him. He never holds himself in high esteem.
Yeah.
And therefore put his villains or anybody else in a lower regard for their failings. You know, I like to think about Batman's villains as a reflection of him, right? He's best explored through his villains.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Batman is a person who took his trauma, he took the unfair things that life did to him, and he became a force for good. His villains often are the exact opposite. Mr. Freeze is a great example of that. He's the exact opposite. He took his trauma, he took the unfairness of life and just said, fine, I'll get my revenge, right? And despite that difference between Batman and Victor Freeze, he never judges him. He doesn't hold that against him. He isn't somebody who says, well, I picked myself up by my bootstraps and made something myself. You should too. No, he continues to have a heart of empathy, and maybe unlike the heart of ice that's in the title. And that really moved me as a kid. The idea of Batman, I'll never forget him standing in silhouette at the end of the episode, just looking in on Mr. Freeze, because he felt for him. And that was interesting to me, even as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the best way to put it? The title, Heart of Ice. Like, there you have it. The complexity that's being explored here. Oh my gosh.
All right. So, Timm and Kris, I really love how this show challenged the way you saw right and wrong, good and evil as children. I think some of the most important literature in our lives are the things that do that for us. You know, it's, did Han Solo shoot first, right? We need to learn how to love that gray area. Obviously, Mr. Freeze is a great villain. But Timm, how do you feel Mr. Freeze ranks amongst the Batman, the animated series villains overall?
In the grand scheme of things from that whole series, he's number 3 for me. The first is Joker. Mark Hamill's Joker is absolutely the most iconic Joker ever. Like, I know that when a lot of people picture the Joker, they picture Heath Ledger's, and he did a great job, and I loved it. But if someone's ever like, who's Joker? It's Mark Hamill's voice. That's Joker. And then second there would be Harley Quinn. I love that she was invented for the show, and then she turned into legitimately this canonical character, which was unfortunately in my mind a little bit ruined by the new series, but we could talk about that later. So this Victor Freeze comes in third, though, because this, from what I understand in terms of visual, this was the first time that Victor Freeze's backstory was actually built into something that humanized him as opposed to just being something ridiculous. I remember seeing Mr. Freeze on the Adam West series, and I remember being like, he's lame. So I love the Adam West Batman, even though we know how campy it was. I love Cesar Romero's Joker on that, but the Mr. Freeze was just lame. And when I think about the Batman and Robin, that Mr. Freeze that Arnold Schwarzenegger played was absolutely ridiculously lame. Even in Gotham, I didn't love Mr. Freeze in the show Gotham when I thought that they were really trying to develop some characters amazingly well, like the Penguin. But this particular Freeze gave him that human element there, visually speaking as well. And so he's number 3 for me.
Love that. Kris, do you have any different villains in your top 3, or is it a similar looking list?
It's probably a similar list. I'd have to really consider where I put Clayface in this ranking, because on this show in particular, he's such a strong villain. So I think I'm comfortable with this ranking as it stands right now. On a later pod, we can talk more deeply, perhaps.
All right. Well, that brings us to the most dangerous question on the Media Lit pod, but it's kind of part of our mission statement, right? Because if you're going to look at something as great literature, you have to be willing to critique it as well. Something can still be amazing, though you are critiquing it. So, Kris, I'm going to go to you first this time. You love this episode of television, but does it have any flaws?
So I was scared of this question because normally I try to be as objective as possible. I can usually find something to critique. But I watched this episode 3 times just to lead up to this pod, and I couldn't find a thing. Not one. The sub villain, the true villain of the episode, Ferris Boyle, works tremendously well for me. I could go on and on about the things that we get right about Batman in terms of hitting different facets of his character and his skill set and what defines him as a hero. I could talk about his relationship to Alfred. All of the things I expect from Batman, they get right in this episode. No notes.
Fair enough. Tim, how about you? You love this episode of television, but does it have any flaws?
Yeah, I had a couple. And honestly, it stems from the initial childhood audience, children's audience. And it also stems from the fact that it had to be so short, right? So I don't remember if it was like Vonnegut or Orwell or some famous author. It might have been William Golding. I don't remember, but someone once said that coincidences only happen in real life in trashy literature, right? And there are a couple moments here where I was like, oh, how nicely coincidental that particular something was. And a lot of times that happened with Batman's detective skills, where he was just like, well, when you configure this way, look at this. We couldn't figure out how they fit together, but now all of a sudden my computer can just do that, right? And like I said, it's a kid show, it's marketed as a kid show, so I get that. But that kind of thing for me is I'm like, yeah, okay, right. Another one was the ridiculously cheesy line when Batman's like, freeze, right? And then Mr. Freeze responds, that's Mr. Freeze to you, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I understand it. I do. I get it. And I know it's great for the audience and for the type of show that it is. But those are the minor flaws that I have with this. And any type of coincidental plot hole, quote unquote, is merely just because of the medium, as opposed to, this idea that it should have been flawless. It wasn't a movie. It was 22 minutes long, and they had to develop an entire character arc where you're going to be empathetic with the villain. And then actually see who the true villain is, right? And so because of that, I'm like, man, I still love it. But those are the small critiques that I have.
No, totally fair. And listen, I love a pun. I'll endure a few cheesy jokes if my writers are going to be folks who love puns. So I'm down. I am fully down for it. And I appreciate you going through that exercise with us, right? Something I always like to remind my students is that it's never going to be perfect. There's always room to continue to grow and change things and fix things. So finding that balance for your audience is a beautiful thing.
And it could still be great, though. I think, I compare this a lot to Frankenstein in my classroom. And with Frankenstein, my students are always like, well, if Frankenstein was building the monster's wife, why didn't he just make her sterile? And I was like, does that mean that he didn't make the monster sterile? Like, that's really weird to think about, right? And they're like, that would have made so much more sense. And I'm like, folks, this is contrived literature, okay? Like, it has to be this way so that we can get to the end of the book. And so there are just sometimes where that has to happen. And although there's that plot hole, quote unquote, it's really not a problem in terms of allowing this to be enduring excellence.
Yeah, it's like the sort of fanboy conversation I'm the least interested in is like power scaling conversations. Like, how could so and so defeat so and so? Kind of stuff is not very fruitful because it's the story first.
Right.
Yeah, I think Stan Lee famously said it's whoever's writing them, right?
Yeah. Right.
That's who wins. Whoever the writer wants to win.
Yes.
Enough background, and quite frankly, we've already started this exercise, but it's time to look at this episode as a piece of great literature, which I think we all agree it really is. Obviously, the reason this episode is so great is Mr. Freeze. We've talked quite a bit about what makes him a great villain, but I wanted to first turn to some of the visual choices and character design for Mr. Freeze, because it's a really compelling design. I think it's really interesting. My first thought was that it almost doesn't fit the aesthetic of the show, yet it does. So I would love to hear a little bit from each of you on the character design here. Tim, how'd they do with the character design for Mr. Freeze visually? We can even talk about the audio design as well, the voice acting, etc.
I actually love both of them. One of the things that I love about Batman the Animated Series is that when you look at the design of anything that's on it, it looks as if it's something that could fit into the 50s and the 40s, but it also looks as if it could be something entirely in the future. And I think that they nailed that with Freeze as well. And so because of that, it just shows how timeless the show is. But particularly with Freeze, when I think about every other representation of Freeze that I've seen that has not actually fully encompassed his head inside of a globe and things like that, I hate it. So with this particular visual, I'm like, this whole thing actually makes sense. He's got his nitrogen tank on his back. He's got the rigid air that he has to have, like he has to breathe in. And it also makes sense when he says, hey, I've got this suit to maintain me, but it's also allowed my strength to be significantly more, as opposed to, this kind of like, flimsy wetsuit that they put on Freeze in the Gotham series, or the Arnold Schwarzenegger Freeze where his face was actually fully exposed. I'm like, why? And so because of that, I think that in all of the visuals that I've seen of Freeze that are not like the Rocksteady games, this is probably the premier one.
Yeah. How about for you, Kris?
Great shout out to the Rocksteady design. That is also a really beautiful Victor Freeze. This design really works for me for all the reasons that Tim highlighted, right? His suit does remind you of sort of the space age design, right? The space race and how we were imagining what a specialty suit might look like. I like the color work. I like that his gloves and boots are sort of this different contrasting purple because he still has to feel like a Batman villain, right? And there's still something sort of zany in that design. The episode opens on his voice, and it's absolutely chilling. Pun intended. But it is. It's the depth of the performance, then also the modulation they put on it to make it sound somewhat mechanical, right? Like it's coming through a speaker from inside of his suit. That totally works for me. Similarly, the pre-transformation Victor Freeze, as a contrast to who he is as the villain, works really well. He's so much softer, right? His voice is much more human. The only knock I'll give as being like just a little cartoonish, of all the things you named, Tim, of like sort of conveniences in the plot or something that makes it seem more childish, all that stuff that you named kind of works for me. But one flaw I probably could have highlighted was something about the transformation from Victor Freeze, the scientist, to Mr. Freeze, the supervillain. Something about that chemical reaction gave him the most villainous eyebrows these thick, pointy, villainous eyebrows that for a minute I thought were a part of his like big goggles with the red lenses. And then until I decided to focus on that to be sure. And then, of course, he emoted, and with his expressions, the eyebrows moved. And I was like, oh, no, it really is his pointy, villainous eyebrows.
I got to go back and relook at that then. Great.
Yeah, it's maybe the one thing with the design that didn't quite work for me.
But you know what? Maybe he got them sort of like tattooed on, right? Like maybe he lost some of that natural hair and he's like, let's go full villain with this thing, man.
That's a brilliant explanation. He needs to go have a conversation with the tattoo artist that went a little heavy.
Yeah. I think both of you just helped me find the words to talk about why this design worked for me. I said something like, it felt like it shouldn't work, but it did. Right. And I think Timm already spoke to the fact that we've got this anachronistic design, right? Like we've got these heavy Art Deco influences, like the 1920s, 1930s kind of vibe. But I think Timm is also correct to mention that sometimes it feels like we're in the 40s and 50s. And this sort of space age vibe, it's another sort of anachronistic visual, but it's from yet a different decade, right? So it fits the aesthetic, but it still kind of others him from everyone else. And they really drive home that helmet with the way it's, echoed in the music box. I think that's a really nice, subtle connection. For all of the obvious puns about the cold that they hit us with, they don't really go too far out of their way to drive that connection home. And I think that really, it's like a nice little bow on the design. And the distance in that voice. You can feel the pain, but it sounds a little inhuman through the machinery. But it's not just a Darth Vader comp. You can hear more pain in there. Really great stuff.
Yeah, very, very well said, especially when he kind of introduces himself in that at the gala to his ultimate prey.
Yeah.
Really cool. Well, I mean, at this point, we've really dug into Mr. Freeze and the complexity of him as a villain, but I'd like to talk more about how that makes the episode more complex, what kinds of themes that opens up here. Randy, let me go to you. Are there any other big ideas or themes that you pulled out of this episode?
Yeah, I think there are two of them, right? Especially, as someone who came to this as an adult, maybe I have watched this in the background as a kid and I was not allowing myself to connect with it. But if you are an adult in our present time period, whatever your politics may be, we may not agree, but you've got concerns about companies and corporations having too much money and power. Even if we're not mad at the same people, everyone has concerns about that, right? So seeing Goth Corp here just play the media like a fiddle. They're feeding this clearly false front of being these kindly humanitarians, and everyone's just kind of buying it, hook, line, and sinker. Timm, I was telling Kris off the podcast, I wasn't watching a lot of Batman the animated series, but I loved the show Dinosaurs.
Oh, me too.
And that featured the We Say So Corporation is kind of like the overarching villain. And I've been rewatching Dinosaurs with my son recently, and I felt some really similar vibes. Right, it's the same sort of period. So I love seeing Victor Fries go up against that, but he's blind to the fact that he's fallen into that territory a little bit. I'm an English teacher. One book I do still teach is The Great Gatsby, and it's a good book. It's not my favorite book, but my favorite character in the book is actually Jordan Baker, who at one point, in response to nearly killing a highway worker because she's driving recklessly, responds that it takes two to make an accident. Other people are going to look out for me, and it's their problem if something goes wrong. It's not just my fault; it's both of our faults. And you kind of see some of that from Mr. Freeze. When he hits one of his henchmen, he's like, "Should have moved. Should have been more careful. Not my problem." So I love that hypocrisy, right? Like we're frustrated with power, but then we can't always see it when we're making mistakes from our perspective.
Brilliantly highlighted. I love that I had forgotten about the beginning of the episode where he's so unempathetically ices his own henchman and then leaves him to die. He certainly is on a high horse when you put that into perspective. What about you, Tim? What did you pull out here?
I'm just thinking, Randy, about that particular scene right now because I rewatched this episode twice. I did once today and once yesterday, and then I did once last week. So sorry, 3 times. And when I saw that henchman scene, and he was just like, "Up, too bad," I didn't even correlate that with the nature of his hypocrisy until you just mentioned it, and I'm like, "Oh my word, blow my mind even more," because I love this episode so much, right?
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where I'm like, wow, this is a great episode to just look at the idea too, that the idea of like fake news or disinformation, whichever political side of the aisle you're on, I couldn't care less. The idea that this is something that's like only here and now in 2024, it's like, well, let's actually go back to 1993 right now or 1992.
Yep.
And we clearly had the same sentiments ringing straight through. And we clearly had the same kind of corporate greed and corruption and the hypocrisy ringing straight through. And the only other thing that I put here too for this kind of thematic conversation was the idea of the very remarkably odd yet potentially true correlation between vengeance and justice. To what extent they actually correlate? And I think that would be a great question to like ask, particularly my students in my classroom is, what's the relationship between vengeance and justice here? And is justice actually served? That's kind of where I would go with this particular piece as well, outside of the idea of that corporate commentary that we see throughout the piece.
And the show doesn't give you the answer, right? It does leave you to wrestle at the end. I think I love the idea of having a classroom conversation immediately after watching an episode like this one.
I was just going to say, why do we see Freeze in jail and not, what was the name of the guy? Last name was
Ferris Boyle.
Ferris Boyle, right? Why do we see Freeze in jail and Ferris Boyle is not, is nothing? We know that Batman gives over the tape. Can we at least see the guy canceled or something? Like, that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, he does give over the tape, but we don't really know. I do like that character design on Ferris Boyle, though, because I think as far as playing with some of these themes, like I talked about how Freeze or Batman's villains are often a reflection of him or he of them in different ways. But I like also that Boyle here might be the villain who has the heart of ice, and they give him these icy blue eyes.
Yeah.
There are other characters in the show with blue eyes, and they're not this color. He has the most remarkably bright, icy blue eyes. And then, of course, they give him like the classic gray on the
That's
side.
what I say, the ice on the side, too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he looks a little bit like Mitt Romney in that way for me.
You're right.
But yeah, that design does really work. And I think he's not just a reflection of Freeze. He's also a reflection of Batman or of Bruce Wayne. We see earlier in the episode, before Bruce Wayne ever witnesses the tape, where he sees what Ferris Boyle does to Victor and to Nora Freeze, he just has a conversation with him in the office where the mask comes off a little bit, right? Boyle thinks he's speaking to a fellow billionaire businessman, and he uses the term wage slaves.
Yes.
Right? It's nice to talk about being a company of the people. And Bruce Wayne says, I feel ill.
Yeah.
Right? Like Bruce is so disgusted by this reflection of himself. This is a version of who he could be, different influences, different circumstances in his life. And this is who he could have found himself to be, just like his villains are somebody he could have found himself to be with different choices.
That correlates exactly with how he was greeted by Boyle, too, because Boyle comes in and says, hey, Bruce Wayne, are you still the terror of the Gotham Knight scene? And he's got to come to terms with that. He has to come to terms with that. Yeah.
So this episode's just doing so much in that way. I think that Batman's empathy is well earned because I think he can see a little bit of himself in both of these villains.
Yeah.
Even though I admitted earlier, this episode maybe didn't hit me as hard as a 40-year-old adult as it hit the two of you as kids, but that, the beauty of the writing still shone through for me. It was really well written. When I enjoy a good episode of television, I like to look up the writer. So I think it would be worth shouting out Paul Dini for writing a really great episode of this television show. He wrote several really well-loved episodes. He also wrote the Harley and Ivy episode, which really launched a pairing that people are still playing with to this day. It's a really popular pairing of characters. It's been done a million times. But I was wondering if you think he brought any sort of special sauce to this episode.
Yeah, I'm glad that you called out Harley and Ivy as well, right? Because it suggests that he has a knack of understanding the complex nature of humanity. I think we've said it a bunch of times tonight that we have an empathetic villain here, but before you can write an empathetic villain, you have to really understand the kinds of things that every person struggles with, the little choices between right and wrong, good and bad that we all make every single day. And so it's clear to me that Paul Dini really understands the character of Bruce Wayne and Batman and the psychology that's at work there. But more generally speaking, just the human condition. He gets it somehow. I don't know where he studied or who he's known or what he's experienced, but Harley and Ivy are also villains who will ask us to think deeply about who they are, why they are, and the choices they make, and who's really the villain. Them or their victims. Often it's more likely they're victims, and they're just doing what they have to.
Yeah, I really think that this was the first time in the series where the villains were complex, right? On Leather Wings was the first villain in the series, and Kris, you had brought up the idea of Batman delivers him to his wife, recognizing that the beast was actually the one that was committing the crime as opposed to the human. So we see that complexity there, but because Victor Fries, you could tell, was doing something evil here, and you knew that he was consciously doing something evil here, that's what really resonated in this episode with me above any other episode. I mean, there are 5 seasons of this particular show. There are plenty of villains that are revisited. There's plenty of awesome stuff to go on. But when you invited me to talk about this, or I don't remember how the conversation came up, Heart of Ice was the first one that came to my mind. And it's because of how Freeze has been projected, because I'm like, I think I love that guy. And he's so bad. He's so bad.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. What about you, Randy? What did you think about the writing here?
I paused here for a minute because what Tim said got me thinking about one of our favorite podcasters, Joanna Robinson, was posting on Twitter today, and I'm paraphrasing her tweet, but it was something like, is there an actor or actress who you just imprinted on like a baby duckling when you were a kid? And she mentioned Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park. And I was wondering if Tim had a little bit of that vibe with Dr. Freeze.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Mr.
Yeah,
Freeze.
our
I'm so
eyes
sorry.
connected, and our eyes connected, and my pupils dilated, and I was like, he's mine forever.
As I mentioned, and I just, showed my hand when I called Mr. Freeze Dr. Freeze, I had to do a little more homework on this episode to get ready. And I learned that Paul Dini has a Lost connection. That's a show that Kris and I both really love. Were you aware of this, Kris?
Yes.
Yeah, so Paul Dini was a story editor on quite a few episodes in the first and second season of Lost. And he wrote an episode that I really love. I don't think I would call it my favorite episode of Lost, but it's an episode I really enjoy called The Moth. And in this episode, the character of John Locke confronts the character of Charlie Pace about his heroin addiction. He recognizes the signs of addiction, and he's trying to help him confront the reality that there is going to be no way for him to continue to feed this addiction when they are trapped on this island away from civilization and society. And instead of simply taking the drugs from Charlie, instead of simply talking down to him, he does hold on to the drugs. And what he says is, I'm going to let you ask me for the drugs 3 times. And the 3rd time you ask me, I'm going to give them to you. And he's trying to challenge him to regulate his own behavior, his own need for the drugs. He's trying to give him an opportunity without, fully infantilizing him and taking away all of his choice. And, it's not a perfect episode of television, but I think that was one of the early dynamics on that show that really sucked me in. So that was really cool to watch this great episode of television and realize, it has a connection to an episode of television that was pretty formative for me. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's got a great sense of character dynamics, power dynamics, and I love that.
Super cool. You know, that's not the only Batman and Lost connection, right?
Tell me more.
Jeff Loeb of Lost fame wrote one of my all-time favorite Batman comics, amongst many others, but Hush is a Jeff Loeb story. So a few Lost connections to Batman there.
I'm always ready for a Lost aside, but yeah,
right.
Thank you both for going down that road with me.
Hold on, I have to go down this road just real quick. I've never seen an episode of Lost. I know it's terrible and it's inhuman.
Okay.
Everybody says that. I've also never seen an episode of Game of Thrones. All right, so now that I've got that off my chest,
I have some concepts for future pods with you that could be a lot of fun in light of that news. More on that later.
All right.
Yeah. But now that we have talked about the writing for the show, the writer of the show, let's talk dialogue. Tim, do you have any favorite quotes from the episode?
Oh my gosh. It's funny because although I thought the Mr. Freeze joke or the Mr. Freeze line was cheesy, I was like, it's great. And they had a lot of these kind of cold puns throughout the piece, and they were actually brilliant. Like they really were. And because of that, like there was a lot of that kind of cold and frozen motif that showing up that I really appreciated. But I actually listed a couple lines here that I really liked, and I know we've commented on some of them. But the first thing that opens, we hear Victor Freeze talking, and he says the monster. He's reflecting on his snow globe with the ballerina inside of it, and he's thinking about his wife. And he says, the monster who took you from me will soon learn that revenge is a dish best served cold. And I'm like, oh, that is such a brutal, brutal line. But I really appreciate that he said the monster who took you from me, because he's dehumanizing that guy. And I also, like I said, I connect this with Frankenstein at all times. And so now that, Boyle doesn't even have a name. It is the monster who took you from me. And Victor does not recognize himself as the monster, even though he's doing atrocious things, particularly to innocent people. So that's one of them. I love the complexity of the line when Bruce Wayne walks into Ferris's office, and Ferris actually says, Bruce Wayne, are you still the terror of the Gotham night scene? And there's the nuance in there. Kris, you had brought up the line that I thought was awesome, or actually it might have been Randy. I don't even remember. It was only like 5 minutes ago, where it talked about the wage slaves, and it says, hey, that people company line is great for PR. The idea that we'll do anything for the PR. But I honestly thought about that also in relation to social media, right? We present this facade all the time, and then we burn it down behind the scenes and whatnot. And then there are two lines that I thought about from a dad's perspective, right? And one of them was, it would move me to tears if I still had tears to shed. And I thought to myself, sometimes when I'm dealing with my kids and they really try to play that really pathetic appeal with me, and I just want to coldly look at them and say, yeah, it would move me to tears if I had tears to shed. And I know that that's not like, it's just so brutal. And I would never say that to my kids, but sometimes I'm like, oof. Another one is, I'm like, ooh, cold like the swift hand of vengeance. Like I had all of these. I knew this question was coming, and I'm like, oh my word, there are so many of these lines here, but they encompass Victor Freeze so well. But the last one that I want to just comment on that I thought was, I think it's probably the most beautiful line in the whole piece. And I know that was the real question, but there were so many that I had to highlight. At the very end, when Batman is handing over the video because he explains why Victor did what he did, as he walked past Ferris out of the office, he's frozen there. Batman does not help him. Like Batman helped the henchman, but he did not help the CEO, right?
Right.
Yep.
In the series. But the other thing too is when Batman walks by and he says, "Good night, humanitarian."
Yep.
And he, this guy just won the humanitarian award, and now there's all of the evidence that he is the least humanitarian person on the planet. And I was just like, oh man, my kids would be like, roasted,
Boom.
I loved it. I loved it. So sorry for so many, but the writing was delicious. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to hit him with all of them.
Dude, you're clearly a pro podcaster. You may claim this is your first one, but we love a good smuggle, and you're smuggling with the best of them. Brilliant.
Heck
Brilliantly
yes.
done.
Yeah, you decimated my list, but I've still got a bunch in the tank, so it's all good.
Good.
Yeah, Randy, hit me with one.
All right, I'm going to hit you with one, and then I'm going to do a smuggle. I'm sorry to do this to you, Chris, but in terms of the themes we've been talking about, it's Victor Freeze, compassion, charity. Where were those pretty words when she needed to hear them? Was a great way to drive that home. And it's all the themes we've been talking about up to that point. But the one I'm actually a little bit more excited to talk about is, again, because I'm kind of new-ish to Batman the Animated Series. Like I said, an episode here and there. My buddy took me to see Mask of the Phantasm when it came out.
Great movie.
Which I remember enjoying, but it didn't quite imprint on me. But one of the best discoveries for me was just seeing that Alfred is sassy as hell in the animated series. Like, he's always sassy, but it's a new brand, like a little bit different from the sassiness of a Michael Caine or whatever. But when Alfred says, "With all the compartments on your belt, you'd think there'd be one for tissues," was just some great sassiness from our guy Alfred. Loves that one.
So good. I guess if you had seen On Leather Wings just before this episode, there's a great little moment between Bruce and Batman where, of course, the media thinks that Batman is the one who's terrorizing Gotham as Man-Bat does. And Alfred says, "Was it not you throwing guards out of the window last night?" And Batman looks at him and says, "I only throw butlers." And it's this wonderful little moment between them. It's just great. My favorite quote actually is a two-parter that starts with Alfred as well. I think we talked earlier about those Kenner toys and how the Kenner toys would give you all these specialty bat suits and specialty gadgets. That's part of what makes Batman fun, that he's always got the right tool for the job. He's always prepared. And in this episode, that takes the form of the chicken soup.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't some special build. It isn't some fancy gadget. It's just what Alfred gave him on his way out the door. Alfred says, "If you're going to go out like that, I suggest you take this. Only way to fight a cold," as he hands him the chicken soup, right? And then later, Batman will smash it over Freeze's helmet. That's how he defeats the villain. It's with the chicken soup. And then Summer Gleason asks him, "What was that?" And Batman repeats, "The only way to fight a cold."
Yes.
And it's just perfect. So of all the poignant things happening in this episode, all the wonderful thematic conversations we've had, Batman at the end of the day is still a fun, noir sort of pulp hero, and these kinds of corny lines are such a big part of that. I love that callback to Alfred.
Now, one of our common segments on this show, sometimes it can overlap a little bit with the question of what's one flaw in this piece of media, depending on the property. Sometimes these questions overlap more than other times, but the segment is called "Hindsight is 2020." And the reason we frame it that way is we're acknowledging that, a full creative team puts together the media that we are talking about. We are not trying to step in and bro out and, say that we thought we could do it better or anything like that.
Right.
But, looking at this through a new lens in the present, not to critique the show, if you could make one small edit to this episode of television just to make it that much more of a chef's kiss, if you will, what would it be? You may, Tim, feel free to step back on one of your flaws from earlier if that helps you, or you could take it in a whole new direction.
No, I actually have an entirely different answer for that one. And it actually comes at one point. Bruce Wayne is trying to break into GothCorp, so he can do his Batman detective stuff. And when he does, or the GothCorp Gala, and when he does, he comes in, and it's Bruce Wayne because of the voice, but he's got a brown wig on, and he's actually got brown eyebrows too. Mm-hmm. But I know that this was this was a bad move in how they did that, because my boys, when they were watching it with me yesterday, so I've got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. My 14-year-old is remarkably astute in terms of picking up on everything. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of obnoxious, to be honest with you. But he couldn't tell that was supposed to be Batman. And so he was like, wait a second. He was like, how did Batman even get in there? And I was like, oh, that was Bruce Wayne. But I think that my problem is the blonde eyebrows. Like, I've never seen someone have like fake eyebrows before. I've seen a wig, but the fake eyebrows, I'm like, where did he all of a sudden? I don't know. It did not sell it for me. Now, Chris, I do agree. If you didn't know that was Batman, that was the point, right? But for a kid to make the connection, who normally makes connections almost always, and he couldn't even like move past that. I was like, I think I'd change that. I think I'd try to make it a little bit more clear.
It fails the narrative, right? If it takes somebody out of it, it fails the narrative. I think that's totally fair. Yeah.
Listen, I recently hit the big 4-0, and I actually did rewind that portion because I assumed it. I assumed it was one of Mr. Freeze's henchmen, like up to some other no good. I was like, oh, wait a minute. So, and then I was like, oh, okay, he goes to the utility belt. Like, it was clear when I rewound it, but I did need to take a second. It's a great edit.
It's hard for me now to separate like my adult mind of Batman and like what I experienced, because like Batman, for me, that was actually one of the things I listed as a strength in the episode, because I think I mentioned earlier, I didn't think the show had any flaws this episode because it's getting all these different facets of Batman, right? And Batman as a master of disguise is something so true to the character, especially in this show, right? You see him, Matches Malone is a great example of the iconic Batman disguise that he uses to go out and do his detective work. Yeah. For a noir detective, it isn't just about putting together the clues. It's first gathering them, and how you do that. So I don't know. When I was a kid, I probably was similarly confused, but now I come to this rewatching it with like all of my Batman experience. So as soon as I see it, I'm like, oh, master of disguise, looking, walking right in. He doesn't need the costume all the time. You know, he does it without the bat cowl once in a while.
All right, you sold me, Chris. You sold me.
Am I not turtley enough for the turtle club?
Turtle. Yeah.
Chris, how about you? Hindsight is 2020. What's one small edit you would make to this episode?
I'm gonna co-sign this. No, you guys convinced me. I think especially the idea that like a kid who normally gets stuff was taken out of the episode for a second, had to like stop and wonder what the heck is going on here. That's a failing. So that didn't stand out to me previously, but you two have sold me on that, because truly, if something pulls you out of the narrative, it's failed in its device. It's failed in its convention. No blonde eyebrows for Batman.
Yeah.
Like put a beard on him or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine's just going to be, and perhaps we get this in some of the future Mr. Freeze episodes. You guys will have to let me know. But I would have loved at least one scene with Nora just to like get a feel for their relationship. I think it's really efficient storytelling. I'm not actually suggesting this is a flaw, but I would have loved to see it, because especially watching with like a 2024 lens, it was like, all you get is kind of like the pretty dancer in a globe that he's pining after. So I would love to hear a little bit more of their relationship, or get a sense of how maybe she would have challenged him, right? Like what kind of a different guy might he be interacting with this other full human being. But yeah, still a great piece of storytelling. And again, a kid's show, 20 minutes, really phenomenal work.
I was just gonna say the second animated movie that they had was not Mask of the Phantasm. It was Batman Sub-Zero. Mm-hmm. And that's the movie you want to watch for that kind of stuff there, Randy.
And that's exactly what I was going to say.
Sorry, Chris.
No, I'm glad you said it's a great call out, because they do need to go there eventually, because part of how Batman gets to Freeze is he tries to like melt his heart, and he calls on him to think about what Nora would want for him. Yeah. And that only works if you've had a little bit of time with Nora first. So yeah, great call out.
Beautiful.
Okay. So now we get back to a really fun one. One of my favorite Media Lit questions. If you could own an autographed still shot from just one frame of this episode, Tim, what would it be and why?
All right. So I know that we have listeners and not viewers, but for you all, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So at the end of the episode, Victor Freeze is seen holding the dancing ballerina, which represents his wife, and it's a snow globe, but it's also, as you called it, Randy, a music box. And one of the things that I noticed, but I didn't articulate like you articulated it earlier, was that Victor Freeze's helmet on his suit actually mimics the shape of the globe. So at the end of the episode, when Victor Freeze is in his prison cell, they zoom in on him holding the music box. But when they do, and when they zoom in on his face, you see half of his face behind the snow globe, and then half of his face is outside of it. And it's that dichotomy right there that reminds you that Victor is the humanized villain. And then sure enough, with that woman, with his wife right there, or what represents his wife right there, it reminds us why he is the way he is on both sides. He's the villain for his wife, but it's his heart for his wife that makes him so human. And you see all of this in that one image. That would be mine.
Dude, such a great pick, such a powerful image. And I love how you drilled into it's like sort of the way his wife sees him in that moment, right? She's not present, of course, but that's what he's reflecting on. And yeah, great call, because we do see that one tear come down his face in that moment. Beautifully examined. What about you, Randy? Is there a standout frame or scene that you would want to capture and have autographed?
Yeah, so I think I have to go with that really early shot that I put right at the top of my summary. I almost brought this up when we were talking about the overall character design. You know, one of my favorite things about the animated series, having gone back to watch, are these really beautiful title cards for every episode. Just really are great tone setters. Anyway, right after that beautiful opening title card, we get the close up on the music box, but then we get this very grainy version of the image of Victor Fries in the background until those two red eyes light up. I found that so compelling. That graininess. I think it helped me take the character design more seriously when I saw it in earnest a few minutes later. Having seen that kind of grainy, kind of comic booky thing, this visual that almost visualizes the gray area of this character before you see him. I found that to be such a beautiful image. But I would love to get that. It's a dark frame, so we'd probably need that signature and like a nice bright silvery sort of marker. I'd love to frame that and get it up on the wall.
Brilliant. I mean, we notoriously, this whole show was drawn on black paper, right? So I think you need a nice bright matte backing to any framed images from this show. Well, I think the one that I had in mind here is closer to yours, Tim. But it's in two parts. So I'm gonna cheat. This is my smuggle for the episode because I'm really interested in. I think I've talked about how Batman sees his villains, and this villain in particular really causes him to ponder. So I love that image of Batman outside of Victor Fries's prison cell. He's standing on a rooftop across the street, and he's in full silhouette. The brown brick building is across from him. You can see Fries in his cell. The image alone isn't tremendously striking. I mean, I think anytime you see Batman in blackout silhouette, he's striking with his cape flowing behind him. But it's because of what he's pondering in that moment as he stands there and stares across through this window. So I would want that framed, but next to it on the left-hand side, preceding it, I would want a frame from the actual security footage that Batman viewed. There's this moment after the accident where Fries collapses against Nora's cryogenic tank. And he slides down from it, and they go close up on just his hand. And his hand is sliding down. You see the fingerprints on the now foggy glass, and Nora's face is in silhouette there as Victor Fries's kind of mid-transformation hand is sliding past. So I would want the fingertips there on the glass, her face in silhouette, and the streaks of his fingertips next to the image of Batman pondering Fries at the end, because it kind of completes that what's going on in Batman's mind. I think right after that moment is where Batman kills the video, and he just says, "My God," like he can't believe what he's just witnessed. So yeah, those two together, framed, nice bright matte backing between them to make sure they both stand out and pop.
Beautiful stuff. Hey, Tim, before we move on to our last question, do you have a smuggle that you want to get in?
I was thinking about it as you were talking, Randy, and when I tried to pull it up while you were talking, but that original focus, or the original close up where it does get grainy and goes towards Victor Fries, right when he opens his red eyes, those bright red eyes right there, that's just chilling, to be completely honest with you. And pun intended, of course, right? But that I would need those eyes right there, and I'm like, oh my
Oh,
god,
yeah.
that's something that you would absolutely get signed at a Comic-Con if you met Paul Dini or Bruce Timm. There's no doubt about it.
I think it's an important part of how they render this episode. I think if you like just Google this episode, probably a lot of the artistic renderings of it will have those bright red eyes, sometimes isolated. That's all you see are the red eyes and kind of like Nora in her globe or something. Yeah,
And think
crazy,
about the
crazy powerful.
Think about the contrast there with the blue that is tied so much to Mr. Freeze. And
Right.
you also have that small bit of warmness from him, but also it's so sinister too. Like when they just open, it's like, oh my gosh. So it encompasses just so much of the nuance. Yeah. So anyway, I wasn't gonna go there, Andy, but now that you forced me to, there you go.
It's okay. As an English teacher and writer, I know you appreciate a good transition. So I wanted to smuggle one in and use it to transition to our final question.
Yeah.
Uh, because number 2 on my list was there's just this incredible shot of the Batmobile skidding across the ice from Mr. Freeze's ray gun that looks incredible. And the Batmobile looks incredible in all of its Art Deco glory.
It's the best Batmobile.
Now, we are recording this in late August, right around the same time Mr. Freeze went on his crime spree. But at the beginning of this month, we got a brand new animated Batman series with a lot of the big names from the original animated series, along with a lot of other big folks who have worked with Batman properties in the past. We've got Bruce Timm from the animated series, J.J. Abrams, and also Matt Reeves involved in this project. We've got a few original voice actors returning and other people who have done voice work in the Batman animated universe. There was a lot of hype for this series. I know that Timm and Kris have managed to catch the entire series. I really tried. Unfortunately, I've only seen the first episode, the first half of the second episode. I have some notes and a lot of positivity about it. It's not the same look as the animated series, but we're still getting some of those cool Art Deco grills. We got a pretty cool looking Batmobile that did not live up to the original animated series one for me, even though I liked it. And a slightly different vibe, right? Like we are still getting some of those things. Episode 2 that I'm in the middle of right now had a shot that looked straight out of The Rocketeer, which is one of my favorite childhood movies.
Yes. What a great movie.
Yeah, it's got a really similar aesthetic. Not as dark, but similar sort of vibes with the Art Deco and the metal and the curves. Really beautiful stuff. But we've got this new animated series, and it's not claiming to be a continuation or direct prequel to what we got, but it's playing in a similar sandbox. So I was wondering how well you guys think this new series is working as sort of a spiritual follow-up to Batman the Animated Series. Kris, I'm going to go to you first because you're looking like you might have some additional context to drop.
Well, no additional context, but I think I was dancing in my seat because how I feel like answering the question is different based on how you just asked it. Because when I watched this, despite Bruce Timm being involved, I don't think I was looking for this to be a spiritual successor to that other animated series. Perhaps because I do hold that other one in such high esteem, such in high regard. And they weren't doing like an X-Men 97 thing where we were trying to take a step forward from that previous narrative. Because if that's what it's trying to be, I don't think it's working. I think you leave the BTAS alone. It did just fine for itself. And I don't think we need to try and replicate exactly that. And if that's what it was trying to do, I would say it's outright failing. But as its own thing, as its own animated venture, its own take in 2024 on Batman and who he is and why he is and who his villains are and why they are. It's working for me. There's certain choices that I may or may not have made myself, but I'm not the creator, right? I like the choices the creators are making. They are working for me. Some of the character updates, some of the new villain origins, certainly the character design for Batman himself. I'm a sucker for the classics, and I like that we're harkening back to the 40s. I like that they didn't do purple gloves, but he's still wearing little gloves like the original Batman design from 38, right? Those tall bat ears, that really works for me. Yes, maybe you can say it's like a spiritual successor to the animated series in some of the artwork, like especially in the fullness of Batman's chest, that kind of barrel-chested version of Batman that they draw, not overly muscular in its design, but like kind of full in its shape and its figure. But as a standalone, as its own thing, I've really enjoyed it. Special shout out to the Clayface episode. Really, really hooked me. I was like, oh, they're doing something interesting here with the villains. It's familiar villains in unfamiliar ways, yet still really true to who they are and what makes them work relative to Batman.
Yeah. Now, Tim, when we talked off the pod, I got the sense that you were at least doing a little bit of a compare and contrast with the two. How are you feeling about this new series?
So I think it falls really flat. But I also think that, whenever you deal with complexity and you deal with romanticism and you deal with or like the ideal and the realistic, right? It can't be the animated series because they didn't want it to be the animated series. But I think that's what breaks my heart. So first of all, I thought the animation was awesome. The animation throwback was like the very similar animation, look and whatnot. I was like, this rocks. I actually appreciated this version of Harvey Dent a lot. And I really appreciated this origin of Harvey Dent a lot. I hated that they turned the Penguin into a woman. And the reason why is because, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, when they created Harley Quinn, she was her own independent female villain that could be her own thing. And I'm like, why take the Penguin to do that when the Penguin, like why not make I don't have a problem that the villain was a woman. I just have a problem that they took the Penguin and made the Penguin a woman, because I'm like, why not create another new fully independent woman villain that's compelling? Like, that makes a lot of sense. And the Penguin with the nose that she had as like a cabaret singer kind of a thing, I'm like, this is not jiving for me. And so that was one of my kind of concerns there. The bigger issue that I had was when I think about the progression of Batman the Animated Series and how it went to Batman Beyond, and then they cut Batman Beyond short to then do a Justice League series with that full animation. I really think that they should have just continued the animated series with 2 more seasons. Now, with all of that being said, although I think it was kind of flat, first of all, although not perfect, the new voice of Batman, because Kevin Conroy has died, and that's my picture of Batman. The guy that they got in there is great. Now, he's not as great as I want him to be, but I'm like, he's got 3 more seasons to be great, right? So I was really thrilled with what that looked like. But I would say that this particular season, although I find it flat, got me excited for the next season, because I hope that they actually take into consideration a lot of what the fans are saying, because fans want it to be Batman the Animated Series. Creators might not, but they have an audience that wants it to be the animated series. And it's like, you know what? Can we upgrade this just a little bit to be more like the animated series? And if they do that, I'm going to be all in. So I'm like 10 for 10 on animation. I'm 9 for 10 on Batman's voice. But the actual series itself, I'm like 6 out of 10 on that, maybe 6.5. I enjoyed it, but it didn't hit me. My kids watched it and they didn't love it. They watched Batman the Animated Series and they're like, "Oh, Dad, this is still great for me right now."
Nice.
So
nice.
that's where I'm at with that.
Totally fair. I will say, I'll add real quick. There was one critique for the series that I had in mind, and it's something that I think has to do with Matt Reeves' involvement, perhaps, because it reminds me of the Batman in this way, but it's the relationship between Alfred and Batman.
Yes.
There's something they seem interested recently in exploring some of Batman's complexity and his struggle with human relationships through the lens of his relationship with Alfred. In the past, I think we've been content to explore his dysfunction in human relationships through like the Bat family, through Robin and his other sidekicks. But yeah, Matt Reeves at least seems to be interested in putting Batman on an arc, putting Bruce on an arc towards a place where he can embrace this relationship again in his life and let somebody all the way in. So if that's where it's going, if it's purposeful, then I'm here to watch it develop. But on its face, I don't love that. That's like the one person where he's truly Bruce Wayne, where the Batman mask falls away, the billionaire playboy mask falls away, and with Alfred, he's really himself, his total complete self. And that's missing. They didn't get that in this series. It's intentional because he calls him Pennyworth all episode until the finale, and then he stops himself and he calls him Alfred for the first time all series.
Having only watched a little bit of it, I'm definitely excited to see more. I am a fan of Hamish Linklater. I think he definitely earned a turn as Batman on the back of things like Midnight Mass, and I even remember enjoying him back in that FX show Legion that was in the X-Men universe. So I dug him. My only real note was when I got my first shot of Bruce Wayne in Caped Crusader. I could not stop thinking that he looked way too much like Archer. He had some similar like arched eyebrows, like the blue eyes, and it kind of took me out of it for a second. But yeah,
That's
they
great.
do seem to be playing up that billionaire playboy a little bit more, which is fun. And I'm excited to see who else is there. But to bring the conversation full circle, it actually brought me back to Heart of Ice a little bit. Because in the second episode, I was really digging the detective there, Montoya, I believe.
Yeah, Montoya, fantastic. She's one of my favorite updates as far as character and where they stand in the new series.
Yeah, because this first interview with Renee Montoya, you get this great moment where Bruce Wayne is testing her. He tries to offer her a bribe, and she won't take it. And we get this nice exchange with Alfred later that she could be an asset. She's good people. This is someone I trust. And I was thinking back to Heart of Ice and seeing that shame that we talked about earlier when he talks to another one of these billionaires who happens to be abusing their power. So I love that we're still playing with some of the themes that we love.
I'm excited to see what voices they bring into it because they've already got a strong voice cast going, got Minnie Driver in there. But the reason I say that is because one thing I forgot to mention throughout this entire conversation was that we have a preview of Mark Hamill as a Batman villain in this episode. He's voicing Ferris Boyle for us, the douchey billionaire. And I didn't
realize that.
I didn't know it until I was rewatching for this, and I went to IMDb because I wanted to check out the Victor Fries voice actor because those first words of the episode were so chilling.
Yeah.
Mark Hamill, Ferris Boyle. And then, of course, you listen to it knowing that, and you can hear Luke Skywalker in Ferris Boyle. But I was floored to find out that he got a turn on the animated series before the Joker.
I really appreciate you shouting that out. Fellas, before we wrap it up, do either of you have any other just kind of lingering thoughts you didn't get to share tonight that you want to get in before we wrap up?
Batman's the GOAT. It just is what it is.
Yeah, I'll second that. No, I think I exhausted my Heart of Ice. And now though, I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to bring back some of these insights into my class when I do Heart of Ice this year when we do Frankenstein. A lot of really nuanced and compelling elements here, especially with the videography and the animation that I'm like, ooh, we're going to talk about that this year.
Cool.
Nice. Yeah. And Tim, I want to thank you. And Kris, I also want to thank you for, pushing me to dig into Batman, the animated series. It's been sitting there on HBO waiting for me. And I'm going to keep digging in. I might even jump ahead for some more of this Victor Fries stuff. I think I'm okay with being spoiled at this point, this many years later. But I've really been loving the product that I have on the page. And Tim, you were truly a phenomenal guest. I knew from all of your incredible videos that you were going to be phenomenal, and you lived up to every expectation I could have had. You are always welcome back here on this podcast anytime you want to chat about something, be it Batman or something else.
Well, now you got me thinking about Alf, Randy. I'm not going to lie. You've got me thinking about Alf. I've been watching a ton of it recently.
Oh, let's do it.
Yeah,
you are officially
absolutely.
a podling. Yeah, you're officially a podling now, man.
Yeah.
It was great to have you. Thank you for joining us. This
appreciate
was a
that.
blast. Yeah.
No, it was an honor to be here.
Before we go, I know we talked about the Garden of English a little bit, but we always like to give our guests a chance to plug any social media stuff out there or any upcoming projects you want to talk about. Where can folks find your work on the internet and elsewhere?
Yeah, they can go to thegardenofenglish.com. But there is mostly teacher support. And then for the more student support based stuff, you can find it on YouTube, just, the Garden of English or Instagram. But the other thing too, once again, is that we're going to be releasing, more shirts and whatnot. We're trying to do apparel stuff as well. And so we're going to have that up in about 2 weeks. And we've got, some really edgy Garden of English images. And, like I said, my second most favorite book is my hymn book, and we're going to have some edgy hymn tees as well. So those are the kind of things that I like to do that get me going. And so the gardenofenglish.com will get you there too, but we're going to have an apparel page for that on the gardenofenglish.com, and then Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm not on Twitter, and I have a TikTok account, but I don't really use it very often. But that might have to change this year. But definitely you can catch me on Instagram and YouTube. That's where you can access me the most.
And for our listeners, I'll be sure to put some links in the show notes. And you should also know that this is an audio medium, but the artwork for Garden of English is pretty sick. So you might want to check that site out when you get a chance.
And student generated, honestly, like supporting the Garden of English isn't just supporting a small business run by a husband and wife, but it's also it supports student generated art because my students are paid for what they do.
Perfect. Kris, where can folks find you on the internet?
Well, they can find me personally on Instagram. I'm an actor and a voice actor. I'm also a dad and a husband. I love doing all those things. You can find my adventures at Kris_Ingersoll. That's Kris spelled like Kringle. But for the podlings, if you want to keep up with all of our drafts and polls, if you want to hear about what's coming next with the pod, please follow us on Instagram at media.lit.pod.
And I'm your host, Randy Elaine. You can find our podcast, Media Lit, on Twitter at MediaLitPod. You can find me on Twitter at Mr_Elaine, ALLAIN. You can find links to Media Lit stuff there. You can find links to my entertainment writing at the Pop Break over there. And also, I would love it if you followed the Pop Break podcast feed. So that you can catch my other podcast, Pod of Doom, a Black Sabbath appreciation podcast, and all of the other great podcasts from the Pop Break Network. I've also got a bunch of great guest appearances from Kris and myself over there from this summer, including that Batman content we mentioned earlier. All right, folks, that'll do it for tonight. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.